Nathan Reed froze mid-stride, his weathered hand still gripping the sedative syringe as the silver wolf's amber eyes locked with his, intelligent, pleading, impossibly aware. This wasn't just any wolf trapped and bleeding before him. Something in those eyes spoke of a consciousness beyond instinct. "Jesus Christ," whispered Rebecca, his young assistant, dropping her notebook as she stumbled backward against a pine tree, her face draining of color. "It's like she knows what we're about to do." The wolf's blood darkened the September soil of Yellowstone, the bullet wound in her shoulder evidence of human cruelty, the same cruelty that had taken her pack 3 years ago, leaving her to survive alone in a world increasingly hostile to her kind. 28 years of scientific training told Nathan to document, report, and let nature take its course. But Catherine would have seen what he saw, a soul worth saving, protocol be damned. "Get the truck," Nathan commanded, his voice steady despite the career suicide he was about to commit. "And tell no one." What forces would he unleash by saving this one wildlife? And would either of them survive the consequences? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. The morning sun cast long shadows across Nathan Reed's modest cabin at the edge of Yellowstone National Park. At 57, his face mapped the weathered terrain of a life spent outdoors, deep creases around his eyes from squinting at wildlife through binoculars, a perpetual tan that never quite faded, even in winter. 28 years as a wildlife biologist had taught him patience, observation, and above all, the sacred rule of non-interference. Nature had its own brutal balance. Until yesterday, he had honored that balance. Nathan sipped his coffee by the window, watching the makeshift quarantine space he'd created in his tool shed. Inside lay the silver wolf. Aurora, he'd named her, after Catherine's favorite natural phenomenon. His wife had loved the dancing lights in the northern sky. Proof, she'd said, that beauty can exist in the coldest places. Catherine had been gone 6 years now. Ovarian cancer, quick and merciless. He still woke, reaching for her side of the bed. Their son Thomas hadn't spoken to him in nearly 5 years. The last conversation had been at Catherine's memorial service, a bitter exchange of accusations. "You were never there," Thomas had said, voice breaking. "Even when Mom was dying, you were tracking some damn animal in the back country." Nathan had no defense. The words cut because they contained truth. The phone rang, startling him from his thoughts. Eleanor Harper, park superintendent and his boss for the past decade. "Nathan, we've got reports of poaching near Lamar Valley. Rangers found blood, but no carcass. Any chance you could check it out?" Her voice carried the familiar no-nonsense tone that had earned her respect throughout the Park Service. What Eleanor didn't know, what no one could know, was that the evidence was currently sedated in his tool shed with an IV drip of antibiotics. "I'll head out after lunch," he lied, the first of many he would tell in the coming weeks. Eleanor Harper was more than his boss. 15 years ago, they had briefly been more than colleagues, finding comfort in each other during a period when Catherine and Nathan had separated. The reconciliation with Catherine had ended things with Eleanor, but the undercurrent of their history remained, an unspoken tension whenever they were alone. Nathan finished his coffee and walked to the shed. Aurora lay still, her breathing steady. The bullet had gone through her shoulder, missing vital organs but leaving her unable to hunt. Without intervention, she would have starved, a slow, agonizing death. "What am I going to do with you?" he whispered. As if in response, Aurora's eyes opened, those uncanny amber eyes that seemed to hold more understanding than any wild animal he'd encountered in nearly 3 decades of field work. She didn't growl or try to retreat. She simply watched him with what he could only describe as trust. Nathan Reed, who had built his career on scientific objectivity, felt something shift inside him. A decision that would cost him everything he'd worked for, but might just save something more valuable than his career. The sedative had worn off, and Aurora was watching Nathan with wary alertness. 3 days since he'd found her in that illegal trap, her silver-gray coat matted with blood, shoulder mangled by what he now confirmed was a high-caliber bullet wound. Nathan knelt at a safe distance, sliding a bowl of raw venison scraps across the shed floor with a broomstick. "Easy now," he murmured, keeping his voice low and steady. "This is to help you heal." Protocol was clear. Document, report, and let nature take its course. Human intervention was discouraged except in cases where humans had caused the injury, and even then, euthanasia was often preferred to rehabilitation. Without evidence linking the wound to a specific human, Nathan had no official grounds for intervention. He had broken that protocol the moment he loaded Aurora into his truck. The wolf sniffed the meat cautiously before eating, her amber eyes never leaving his face. Park records would later confirm his suspicions. Aurora was a known wolf, previously the alpha female of the Wapiti Lake Pack. 3 years ago, poachers had killed her mate and 2 of her cubs. Only one young male, identified by a distinctive white-tipped tail, had escaped with her. Since then, she'd been observed occasionally, always alone, a remarkable feat for a pack animal. "Rebecca is the only one who knows," Nathan told Aurora, as if she could understand. His young assistant had helped him transport the wolf and promised secrecy. "If the park finds out, I'm finished. If Blackwood finds out, we're both in trouble." Victor Blackwood's sprawling ranch bordered Yellowstone to the northeast. The third-generation cattle rancher made no secret of his hatred for wolves, frequently testifying against reintroduction programs and lobbying for expanded hunting rights. Blackwood's family had been in the valley since before the park was established, and he wielded considerable influence with local politicians. Nathan's satellite phone buzzed. Eleanor. "Reed, where's that report on the Lamar Valley incident? Rangers are waiting." Nathan glanced at the half-written fabrication on his laptop. "Sending it now. Looks like a wolf was injured, but the blood trail went cold. Probably survived." "Probably won't survive long," Eleanor replied. "That's 3 suspected poaching incidents this month. Blackwood's been stirring up the ranchers again with those exaggerated predation claims." After ending the call, Nathan returned to Aurora. The antibiotics were working. Her wound looked cleaner, the inflammation reduced. Still, she needed at least 3 weeks before she could be released. 3 weeks of deception, 3 weeks of career suicide if discovered. "I made the wrong choice once," he told the silent wolf, "with Catherine. I won't make it again." By week 2, something unexpected happened. Aurora's wariness gave way to what Nathan could only describe as cautious acceptance. She no longer retreated to the corner when he entered the shed. Instead, she watched him with those intelligent eyes, following his movements as he changed her bandages and cleaned her wound. On the 14th night, a thunderstorm rattled the windows of Nathan's cabin, wind howled through the pines, and rain pounded the metal roof of the shed. Concerned about leaks, Nathan grabbed a flashlight and raincoat, venturing out to check on Aurora. He found her trembling in the corner, ears flattened against the thunder. Acting on instinct rather than training, Nathan sat on the floor, maintaining a respectful distance. To his amazement, after several minutes, Aurora inched closer until her body pressed lightly against his leg. "It's okay," he murmured. "Storms pass." That night changed something between them. A trust formed, tentative, fragile, but real. Each evening after fieldwork, Nathan would sit in the shed, sometimes reading aloud from Catherine's favorite poetry book, sometimes simply sitting in companionable silence as Aurora lay nearby. "You know, Catherine would have loved you," he told Aurora on the 18th day. She understood connections that went beyond words. As Aurora's strength returned, Nathan began taking her on short, controlled walks in the woods surrounding his remote cabin, always at dawn when no one would see them, always with a sedative ready in case she bolted or turned aggressive. She never did. During the third week, Nathan made a discovery that stopped him cold. While reviewing trail camera footage from a research project, he spotted a lone male wolf with a white-tipped tail, Aurora's surviving son, now fully grown. The footage placed him less than 20 miles from Nathan's cabin. "He's alive," Nathan told Aurora that evening. "Your boy survived." The wolf cocked her head at his excited tone, ears forward with interest. "3 more days," Nathan promised. "Then we'll try to find him." The morning of Aurora's planned release, Nathan woke to the sound of a vehicle coming up his private road, a sound that shouldn't exist. No one was scheduled to visit. Through the window, he recognized Eleanor's Park Service SUV. Beside it, a larger, more expensive vehicle, Victor Blackwood's black Ford F-350. "Damn it," Nathan muttered, quickly pulling on clothes. He rushed to the shed, securing the door with a padlock. "Stay quiet," he whispered through the crack, though he knew the wolf couldn't understand. Eleanor stood on his porch, her expression grave. Blackwood remained by his truck, arms crossed over his chest, a satisfied smile on his weathered face. "Nathan," Eleanor began, "I need to inspect your property." "On what grounds?" Nathan demanded, blocking the doorway. "Anonymous tip," she replied, not meeting his eyes. "Claim of illegal wildlife rehabilitation." Blackwood called from the driveway. "Why don't you save us all some time, Reed? We know what you've got in that shed." Nathan's mind raced. How had they found out? Rebecca was loyal. He'd been careful. Then he remembered the veterinary supplies he'd purchased in town, the antibiotics charged to his personal credit card. "Eleanor," Nathan said quietly, "give me 5 minutes alone first." She hesitated, then nodded. 5 minutes. Inside, Nathan grabbed his phone and called Rebecca. "They're here. Blackwood and Eleanor. I need a diversion and transportation for our patient. Back road, 15 minutes. Without waiting for a response, he hung up and hurried to the shed. Aurora was alert, sensing his anxiety. Working quickly, Nathan prepared a mild sedative and administered it to keep her calm during transport. "Change of plans," he told the drowsy wolf. "We're leaving early." Nathan heard Eleanor's voice outside, growing impatient. Through the small window, he could see Blackwood walking toward the shed, his purpose clear in every step. Just then, the emergency radio in Eleanor's vehicle crackled to life. "All available rangers, wildfire reported near Madison Junction. Immediate response required." It was Rebecca's diversion. Eleanor hesitated, torn between duty and her current mission. "Blackwood, we need to postpone this. That's in my jurisdiction." "Like hell we will," Blackwood growled. "He'll move the evidence." While they argued, Nathan slipped out the back of the shed with Aurora, moving quietly through the trees to the service road behind his property. Rebecca was waiting in her personal vehicle, the back already prepared with blankets. "I can't believe I'm risking my career for this," she whispered, as Nathan loaded the sedated wolf. "You're not," Nathan replied firmly. "If anyone asks, I coerced you." "This is all on me." They drove deep into the backcountry, following GPS coordinates from the trail camera footage. Aurora was beginning to stir as they reached the drop point, a secluded meadow near a stream. "This is as far as we go," Nathan told Rebecca, lifting Aurora from the vehicle. The wolf was fully awake now, her amber eyes taking in the familiar wilderness. Nathan removed the makeshift collar he'd used during her rehabilitation. "Find your son," he said softly, stepping back. "He needs you." Aurora hesitated, looking back at Nathan with an intensity that made his chest tight. Then she turned and loped into the trees, a silver ghost returning to the wild where she belonged. Rebecca touched his arm. We need to go. Eleanor will track my vehicle's GPS. You go back, Nathan said. I'll hike out a different way. Need to cover our tracks. What will you tell them? Nathan stared at the spot where Aurora had disappeared. The truth. Just not all of it. When Nathan finally returned to his cabin that evening, Eleanor was waiting alone on his porch. The look on her face told him everything. You're suspended, effective immediately, she said, handing him an official letter. Blackwood filed a formal complaint with evidence, credit card receipts for veterinary supplies, hair samples from your shed, photos of you with what appears to be a sedated wolf in your truck. How did he get those photos? Nathan demanded. Eleanor's gaze dropped. Someone's been watching you, Nathan. This goes beyond just Blackwood. After she left, Nathan sat on his porch as darkness fell, the weight of consequences settling around him. 28 years of service, his reputation, possibly even criminal charges for wildlife violations, all at risk now. His phone rang, an unknown number. Dad? The voice he hadn't heard in nearly 5 years. Thomas. Thomas? Nathan gripped the phone tighter. How did you? I saw your name come across my desk today, his son interrupted. At work. I'm with Blackwood Ranch now. Legal counsel. The floor seemed to drop from beneath Nathan's feet. His own son was working for Victor Blackwood. You're working for Blackwood? The betrayal stung worse than his suspension. It's not what you think, Thomas replied, his voice tight. We need to talk. There are things you don't understand. As Nathan hung up the phone, he gazed out at the darkening forest, wondering if Aurora had found her son, and whether his own son had found him only to destroy what remained of his life. The Yellowstone Inn's coffee shop buzzed with morning tourists, providing the anonymity Nathan needed for this meeting. He spotted Thomas immediately, Catherine's eyes in a face that had grown leaner, more serious than he remembered. 5 years had turned his boy into a stranger. You look like hell, Thomas said as he slid into the booth. Nathan hadn't slept. The suspension letter lay heavy in his jacket pocket, his career hanging by a thread. Occupational hazard when you're being investigated for federal wildlife violations. Thomas winced. That's why I called. I didn't know it was you until the paperwork crossed my desk yesterday. Funny coincidence. Nathan couldn't keep the bitterness from his voice. My son works for the man trying to destroy me. I didn't take the job to hurt you. Thomas stirred his coffee unnecessarily. I took it because Blackwood Ranch has been at the center of every major land use case in the region. It's valuable experience. For what? Helping rich ranchers circumvent environmental protections? Thomas leaned forward, voice dropping. For finding their legal vulnerabilities. I'm an environmental attorney, Dad. I specialized in conservation law. Nathan studied his son's face, looking for deception and finding none. Then why work for Blackwood? Know your enemy, Thomas replied simply. I've been documenting questionable practices for months, but that's not why I called. Blackwood is obsessed with this wolf case, your wolf case. It goes beyond normal rancher conservationist tension. It's personal for him. Aurora, Nathan said quietly. What? The wolf's name is Aurora. Thomas gave him a look that was pure Catherine, equal parts exasperation and fondness. You named a wild wolf after Mom's favorite natural phenomenon. That's actually on brand for you. For a moment, the years between them felt less vast. Blackwood lost his grandson 3 years ago, Thomas continued. Michael, 8 years old. The official report says he wandered off the property and was attacked by predators. Blackwood insists it was wolves, specifically from the Wapiti Lake Pack. Nathan's breath caught. Aurora's pack. The forensic evidence was inconclusive. Some experts suggested feral dogs, not wolves, but Blackwood has been on a crusade ever since. He's using every legal and political connection to undermine wolf protection. And illegal methods, too, I'd wager, Nathan added. Thomas hesitated. I can't prove that. Not yet. He slid a folder across the table. But I found these in his private files when I was researching the property boundaries case. Inside were satellite maps of Yellowstone with wolf pack territories marked, tracking data that shouldn't have been accessible to private citizens, and photographs of dead wolves clearly taken as trophies. Jesus, Nathan muttered. This is systematic poaching. I think it goes deeper. There's something about this particular wolf that's got him rattled. Thomas checked his watch. I need to go. Blackwood has a board meeting at 11, and I'm supposed to present the quarterly legal review. Thomas, Nathan said as his son stood to leave. Thank you. I'm not doing this for you, Thomas replied, but the edge in his voice had softened. I'm doing it because it's right. After Thomas left, Nathan drove to Rebecca's small apartment in Gardner. She opened the door looking as sleep-deprived as he felt. Any news about Aurora? She asked, ushering him inside. Nothing yet, but I have trail camera access for the area where we released her. Nathan set up his laptop on her kitchen table. And I have a theory about why Blackwood is so determined to find her specifically. They spent hours reviewing footage, searching for any sign of the silver wolf or her white-tailed son. Near dusk, Rebecca gasped, pointing at the screen. There. That's her! The night vision footage showed Aurora moving cautiously through a clearing. Behind her, partially obscured by trees, was another wolf, the white-tailed male they hoped was her son. She found him, Nathan whispered, emotion thick in his throat, but what they saw next defied conventional wolf behavior. The footage, taken over several days, showed Aurora and her son encountering a small pack of 3 younger wolves. Instead of the territorial aggression typical among wolf packs, the interaction appeared cautious, then cooperative. That's unusual, Rebecca noted. Established packs don't typically accept new adults. More footage revealed something even more remarkable. The newly formed group was hunting together, but with a pattern neither scientist had observed before. They were specifically targeting elk that moved abnormally. Staggering, disoriented animals that, to the trained eye, showed signs of chronic wasting disease. They're selecting diseased prey, Nathan realized, excitement building. This could be a natural evolution of predator behavior in response to CWD. Chronic wasting disease had been devastating elk and deer populations across the region. If wolves were naturally selecting infected animals, they could be providing a critical ecosystem service by removing disease vectors. We need to document this, Rebecca said. This could change how predator management is approached. I'm suspended, remember. Any research I conduct now would be disregarded. Rebecca straightened her shoulders. Then I'll document it. I'll apply for an emergency research permit citing the CWD management implications. As they continued watching the footage, Nathan's phone rang. Eleanor. I need to see you, she said without preamble. The coffee shop at the Yellowstone Inn. 1 hour. Eleanor was already waiting when Nathan arrived, her official Park Service uniform replaced by civilian clothes. A signal this wasn't an official meeting. I'm putting my career on the line being seen with you right now, she said as he sat down. Seems to be going around. Nathan ordered coffee he didn't want. Why the cloak and dagger? Eleanor slid a USB drive across the table. This was anonymously delivered to my office this morning. It's footage from a trail camera on Blackwood's property. Showing what? A wolf being shot? A silver female with distinctive markings. The shooter's face isn't visible, but the location is clearly inside park boundaries. Nathan's heart raced. Aurora? The date stamp is from 3 days ago. If it's your wolf, she's alive, or was when this was filmed. The shot appears to miss, and she escapes. Eleanor leaned closer. Nathan, why is Blackwood so obsessed with this particular wolf? What aren't you telling me? Nathan hesitated, then made a decision. Aurora was the alpha female of the Wapiti Lake Pack, the pack Blackwood blames for his grandson's death. But that was determined to be inconclusive. The evidence suggested feral dogs. Blackwood doesn't care about evidence. He wants revenge, and Aurora is the symbol of everything he hates. Nathan rubbed his temples. There's more. Aurora is displaying unusual hunting behavior, specifically targeting diseased elk. It could be a significant adaptation for disease management. Eleanor's expression shifted from skepticism to professional interest. That would be unprecedented. Rebecca is applying for a research permit to document it. If approved, it could provide protection for Aurora and her new pack under scientific research protocols. I'll expedite the permit, Eleanor promised. But Nathan, you need to be careful. Blackwood has influential friends. The governor's office is pressuring me to make an example of your case. As Eleanor stood to leave, Nathan caught her arm. Why are you helping me, after I broke every regulation in the book? She gave him a sad smile. Because Catherine once told me that your greatest strength and worst flaw was the same thing. You care too much. She was right. That evening, Nathan returned to his cabin to find the front door ajar. Heart pounding, he approached cautiously. Inside, drawers had been pulled open, papers scattered across the floor. His computer was gone, along with his field journals and camera equipment. On the kitchen table lay a single item, a small, hand-carved wooden wolf that had belonged to Catherine. The message was clear. Blackwood knew exactly how to hurt him. Nathan's phone rang. Thomas again. "Dad, where are you?" His son's voice was urgent. "At my cabin. Someone broke in. Get out of there now. Blackwood knows about the footage Eleanor gave you. He's coming after you, and he's not alone." As if on cue, headlights appeared at the end of Nathan's long driveway. "Too late," Nathan said grimly. "They're already here." "Listen to me," Thomas insisted. "There's a package in your mailbox. I left it there this morning. Get it and get out the back way. Call me when you're clear." Nathan slipped out the rear door and into the surrounding woods just as vehicles pulled up to his cabin. The metal mailbox at the end of his property contained a sealed envelope. Inside was a key and an address in Bozeman, along with a note in Thomas's handwriting. Mom's storage unit. What you need is there. 3 hours later, having evaded Blackwood's men, Nathan stood in a small climate-controlled storage unit surrounded by Catherine's carefully preserved possessions. Thomas had given him the code to a locked file cabinet, which contained something Nathan had never expected to find, a collection of unsent letters from Catherine to him, dated throughout her illness. With trembling hands, he opened the first one. "My dearest Nathan," it began. "By the time you read this, if you ever do, I'll be gone. There are things I need you to know that I couldn't bring myself to say." Nathan sank to the floor, letters scattered around him, as Catherine's words washed over him. She had understood his absences. She had known his work was his calling. She had loved him for his dedication, not despite it. And most painful of all, she had asked him to heal the rift with Thomas, to help their son understand that Nathan's absence had been her choice as much as his. "I told him to let you work," she wrote. "I knew how much you needed the escape, how helpless you felt watching me fade. It was my gift to you, but he was too young to understand. Help him see, Nathan. Help him forgive both of us." Dawn was breaking when Nathan finally called Thomas. "I found the letters," he said, voice rough with emotion. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I only found them myself last week," Thomas admitted. I've been helping organize Mom's things for donation. I was angry when I found them. Then I realized I had it all wrong." "We both did," Nathan said. "Thomas, I'm sorry." "Not now, Dad. We have bigger problems. Blackwood's called an emergency town hall meeting for this afternoon. He's bringing in state wildlife officials and presenting evidence that wolves are endangering the community. He has allies in the governor's office pushing for an emergency culling operation, specifically targeting Aurora's new pack. We need to stop him. The research Rebecca's gathering about selective predation could counter his arguments." "It won't be enough," Thomas said. "Not in time. We need something more compelling." Nathan thought of the trail camera footage Eleanor had given him, of Aurora's intelligent hunting strategies, of the letters from Catherine urging reconciliation and purpose. "I think I know what to do," he said, "but I'll need your help." The community center was packed beyond capacity. Ranchers in worn denim sat shoulder to shoulder with tourists in high-end outdoor gear, while park employees stood along the walls. At the front, Victor Blackwood commanded attention, tall, imposing, and utterly convinced of his righteousness. "For generations, my family has worked this land," Blackwood was saying, his voice carrying the practiced cadence of a man accustomed to being heard. "We endured when the government carved out Yellowstone, taking the best grazing land. We adapted when regulations piled up like snow in winter. But this—" he jabbed a finger at projected images of dead livestock. "This we cannot abide." Nathan slipped in through a side door, keeping to the shadows at the back of the room. He spotted Thomas near the front, dressed in the dark suit of Blackwood's legal team, but looking increasingly uncomfortable as his employer continued. "The wolf reintroduction program has been a disaster from day one," Blackwood declared. "Now we have evidence of increasingly aggressive wolf behavior, with packs forming outside normal patterns and threatening livestock, pets, and potentially humans." From his position, Nathan could see Eleanor sitting stiffly in the park service section, her face carefully neutral despite the mounting distortions in Blackwood's presentation. 3 years ago, Blackwood's voice dropped to a pained hush. "These predators took my grandson, Michael, an 8-year-old boy who just wanted to explore his family's land." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Nathan noticed Thomas's head drop slightly. He knew this emotional appeal was coming. "The authorities called it inconclusive," Blackwood continued, practically spitting the word. "But those of us who found him know the truth. And now the very wolf believed to be part of that pack has formed a new, unnatural grouping that experts are calling behaviorally anomalous." Nathan tensed. Blackwood was deliberately distorting Rebecca's preliminary research findings, turning Aurora's adaptive hunting behavior into something sinister. "We have a wildlife biologist here today," Blackwood gestured toward Rebecca, who looked startled to be called out, "who has documented this abnormal pack. A pack led by a wolf that was illegally rehabilitated by a suspended park employee who put his personal feelings above public safety." All eyes turned to Rebecca, who stood reluctantly. "Mr. Blackwood is misrepresenting my findings," she said clearly. "The behavioral adaptations I've observed suggest selective predation of diseased elk, a potential natural control for chronic wasting disease that benefits the entire ecosystem." "Convenient interpretation," Blackwood countered smoothly. "But the fact remains that a dangerous predator was illegally treated and released by Nathan Reed, who deliberately violated federal wildlife protocols. Where is Reed, by the way? Too ashamed to face the community he's endangered?" Nathan felt a hand on his shoulder and turned to find Eleanor beside him. "He's baiting you," she whispered. "Don't." But Nathan was already moving forward, making his way down the center aisle. The crowd parted, conversation hushing as he approached the front. "I'm right here, Victor," he said, his voice steady despite the racing of his heart, "and I'd like to address your claims directly." Blackwood's face registered momentary surprise before settling into smug satisfaction. By all means, Mr. Reed, explain to these good people why you felt entitled to ignore wildlife management protocols and release a dangerous predator back into our community. Nathan stepped onto the small stage, turning to face the crowd rather than Blackwood. I've spent 28 years studying the wildlife of this region. I know many of you. I've worked with your ranches on predator management, advised your businesses on sustainable tourism, taught your children about conservation. He paused, letting his gaze move across familiar faces. When I found Aurora, yes, I named her, she had been shot and left to die slowly in an illegal trap set inside park boundaries. The bullet matched a caliber commonly used by poachers in the area. Nathan didn't look at Blackwood. I made a choice to help her, knowing it might cost me my career. That was my decision alone, and I accept the consequences. A touching confession, Blackwood interrupted. But it doesn't change the fact that your actions put this community at risk. On the contrary, Nathan continued calmly, what Rebecca has discovered since Aurora's release represents a potentially groundbreaking development in wildlife management. Aurora and her new pack are specifically targeting elk showing signs of chronic wasting disease, a devastating prion disease that threatens to decimate our elk and deer populations if left unchecked. He gestured to Rebecca, who nodded confirmation. The preliminary data suggests these wolves may have developed an ability to identify infected animals before they show obvious symptoms. This selective predation could be a critical natural check on disease spread, precisely the kind of ecosystem service that predators provide. A murmur of interest moved through the crowd. Nathan noted several wildlife photographers taking notes. Good. Let this reach beyond the local community. Furthermore, Nathan continued, we have evidence that the attack on Michael Blackwood 3 years ago was not the work of wolves. He hated using the tragedy this way, but Blackwood had made it central to his argument. The forensic evidence pointed to feral dogs, not wolves. The bite patterns, the tracking evidence, none of it matched wolf predation. Blackwood's face darkened dangerously. How dare you? I'm not minimizing your loss, Nathan said, turning to face Blackwood directly. I can't imagine your pain, but using that tragedy to justify persecution of a species that wasn't responsible, that's not justice for Michael. You know nothing about justice, Blackwood snarled, his careful facade cracking. That wolf, your precious Aurora, was seen near my property the day Michael died. That entire pack should have been eliminated then. From the side of the stage, Thomas stepped forward, legal folder in hand. Mr. Blackwood, as your counsel, I strongly advise against continuing this line of discussion. Blackwood waved him off. I don't need your advice, son. Actually, you do, Thomas replied, his voice gaining strength. Because I have the complete forensic report from Michael's case, including DNA analysis that conclusively identified the predator as canine, not lupine, specifically a feral dog that was later captured and euthanized on the Carson property adjoining yours. The room went absolutely silent. Nathan looked at his son with surprise. He hadn't known about this evidence. That's a lie, Blackwood said, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. Thomas opened the folder. The report was filed 3 years ago but never entered into public record at the family's request, your request. You've known the truth for 3 years, but you've continued to blame wolves because it served your agenda. Blackwood's face had gone pale. This is a professional betrayal, Thomas. You're fired. I resigned this morning, Thomas replied evenly, then turned to address the crowd. There's more. I've compiled documentation of systematic wildlife violations originating from Blackwood Ranch, illegal trapping, unauthorized access to park lands, and evidence suggesting involvement in at least 6 wolf killings over the past 3 years. Nathan watched his son with a mixture of pride and astonishment. Thomas had gone far beyond what Nathan had asked of him for today's meeting. "This is slander," Blackwood sputtered. "You have no proof." "Actually," Eleanor stood up from her seat, "we do. Anonymous footage was provided to the Park Service showing a shooter matching your description killing a wolf inside park boundaries last week. Ballistics from the bullet recovered match your registered rifle, Mr. Blackwood." The community center erupted in chaotic conversation. Nathan caught Thomas's eye across the stage, a moment of silent understanding passing between them. Whatever happened next, they were in it together. As the meeting devolved into heated debate, Nathan slipped outside, needing air. The October afternoon was crisp, aspen leaves shimmering gold against the blue Montana sky. He found a bench and sat heavily, the adrenaline of confrontation giving way to bone-deep exhaustion. Thomas joined him a few minutes later, loosening his tie and unfastening his collar button. "That was quite a performance in there," Nathan said. "When did you find out about the forensic report?" "Last week. It was buried in the case files. Deliberately, I suspect." Thomas sat beside him. "Blackwood's been using his grandson's death to drive his anti-wolf agenda, knowing all along it wasn't wolves that killed Michael. Grief does strange things to people." "This isn't grief, Dad, it's manipulation." Thomas ran a hand through his hair, Catherine's gesture. "Blackwood Ranch has been losing money for years. The only thing keeping it afloat is government subsidies and insurance payouts, including substantial compensation for livestock predation. He needs wolves to blame." Nathan shook his head, the pieces falling into place. "That's why he's been so fixated on Aurora. Her pack was in the area when Michael died. The perfect scapegoat." "Exactly. And now that she's forming a new pack with unusual hunting behavior, he's terrified the scientific value will lead to enhanced protections." Thomas hesitated. "Dad, I'm sorry about everything. The way I left things after Mom died. What I said at her service." "You were hurting," Nathan said simply. "We both were. Mom's letters helped me understand. She wanted you to be in the field. She knew how much you needed that escape." Thomas looked out across the parking lot where Blackwood was now engaged in a heated argument with the county sheriff. "She was protecting you, like you protected Aurora." Before Nathan could respond, Rebecca rushed out of the building, laptop clutched to her chest, expression urgent. "Nathan, Thomas, you need to see this. New footage from the Northern Trail cameras." They followed her to her car, where she opened her laptop. The screen showed Aurora's pack moving with purpose along a ridgeline Nathan recognized as bordering Blackwood's property. "This was captured an hour ago," Rebecca explained. "They're traveling into an area with the highest concentration of CWD-infected elk. It's perfect for documenting the selective predation hypothesis. And conveniently far from Blackwood," Nathan noted. "We should get up there, establish observation points before we lose the light." "I'll drive," Thomas offered, then paused. "That is, if you want company." Nathan looked at his son, Catherine's eyes, his stubborn chin, and felt a tightness in his chest that had nothing to do with his suspension or the confrontation with Blackwood. "I'd like that very much," he said. As they loaded equipment into Rebecca's SUV, Eleanor approached, still in her official capacity, but with a hint of the woman Nathan had once known in her expression. "The sheriff is taking Blackwood in for questioning," she informed them. "The evidence you presented, combined with the footage we received, was enough for a search warrant. They're at the ranch now." "And my suspension?" Nathan asked. "Still in effect, pending the official investigation," Eleanor replied formally, then lowered her voice. "But I've recommended it be converted to administrative leave with a research exception for the CWD predation study." The director was impressed by the preliminary findings. As Eleanor walked away, Nathan felt a weight lifting, not completely, but enough to breathe more easily. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time in weeks, he felt hope. The drive to the northern observation point took nearly 2 hours. The conversation between father and son, tentative at first, then flowing more naturally as shared memories of Catherine created a bridge across the years of estrangement. "She used to read me Jack London before bed," Thomas recalled as they bumped along a fire road. "I was convinced I was going to live in Alaska and have a wolf dog for a best friend." "She encouraged your wild side," Nathan smiled. "She said it was the Reed family trait, stubborn idealism in the face of practical reality." When they reached the observation point, the sun was low in the sky, painting the mountains in amber and gold. Rebecca set up her equipment with practiced efficiency while Nathan scanned the valley with his binoculars. "There," he said softly, passing the binoculars to Thomas. "On the ridge to the northeast. Aurora's in the lead." Through the magnified lenses, Thomas could see the silver wolf moving confidently along the ridgeline, followed by 5 other wolves, including the distinctive white-tailed male. "They're heading toward that elk herd in the valley," Rebecca noted, focusing her camera equipment. "Perfect conditions for documentation." For the next hour, they watched in professional silence as Aurora's pack employed hunting strategies Nathan had never observed in his nearly 3 decades of fieldwork. Rather than targeting the young or elderly elk at the edge of the herd, standard wolf hunting behavior, they systematically identified and isolated animals showing subtle signs of impaired movement. "Look at that coordination," Rebecca whispered, recording everything. "They're communicating locations, creating strategic isolation points. It's like they're testing the herd," Nathan added, "watching for specific responses that indicate infection." As darkness fell, they reluctantly packed up, planning to return at first light. The drive back was quiet, each lost in thought about what they'd witnessed. At the junction where Thomas would normally turn toward Bozeman, he hesitated. "Dad, I was thinking I might stay at the cabin tonight, if that's okay, for an early start tomorrow." Nathan felt a lump in his throat. "More than okay," he managed. That night, in the cabin where he'd raised his son, Nathan made a simple dinner while Thomas built a fire in the old stone fireplace. Over pasta and wine, they talked about Catherine's letters, about the years of misunderstanding, about Aurora, and the unexpected path to reconciliation she had created. "Mom would have loved this," Thomas said, gesturing between them with his wine glass. "Us working together, especially on something this important." Nathan nodded, unable to speak past the emotion in his throat. Outside, an owl called into the darkness, and somewhere in the vast wilderness beyond the cabin windows, Aurora led her pack in the ancient dance of predator and prey, a dance that was evolving before their eyes into something new, something that might just save them all. Dawn broke in ribbons of pink and gold over the mountains as Nathan, Thomas, and Rebecca established their observation blind on the ridge overlooking what they now called Aurora's hunting ground. 3 weeks had passed since the confrontation with Blackwood. The rancher had been released on bail, facing charges of wildlife poaching and evidence tampering. His influence in the community diminished but not destroyed. Nathan's administrative leave had been modified to allow participation in the chronic wasting disease predation study, now officially sanctioned by both the Park Service and university research partners. What had begun as one man's act of compassion had evolved into a groundbreaking research project with implications for wildlife management across North America. "Movement at the tree line," Rebecca whispered, adjusting her camera. "That's Aurora." The silver wolf emerged from the forest edge, her distinctive gait recognizable even at a distance. Behind her came 7 wolves. The pack had grown, incorporating 2 younger wolves that had likely been rejected from other packs. What had begun as a reunion between mother and son had become something larger, something that defied conventional understanding of wolf social structures. "Look at how they're positioning," Nathan murmured, making notes as the pack spread out in a strategic formation around a small herd of elk. "They're already identifying targets." Thomas, who had taken a leave of absence from his law firm to assist with the research, focused his camera on a particular elk near the edge of the herd, an animal that appeared healthy to the untrained eye but moved with subtle irregularity. "That one," he said. "Third from the left. Same pattern as yesterday?" Nathan nodded. "Slight head tremor, inconsistent gait." Early CWD indicators. For hours, they documented the pack's systematic testing of the herd, brief charges that prompted movement, revealing animals with delayed reactions or impaired coordination. When the wolves finally brought down an elk, Rebecca confirmed through her telephoto lens what the previous necropsies had shown: classic signs of chronic wasting disease. "They're selecting infected animals with remarkable accuracy," she said, reviewing the footage. "The success rate is over 80% based on post-mortem testing." Nathan felt a surge of professional excitement mixed with personal vindication. This is selective pressure in action. Wolves evolving hunting strategies in response to disease prevalence. It could be a critical mechanism for limiting CWD spread. Thomas, still learning the scientific terminology but a quick study, looked thoughtful. "It's like nature's own quarantine system." As they packed up their equipment, Nathan's satellite phone buzzed. "Eleanor." "Reed," he answered, stepping away from the blind. "Nathan, we have a situation." Eleanor's voice was tight with controlled tension. "Blackwood's property borders the northern section where Aurora's pack has been hunting. He's organized a group of ranchers for what he's calling a predator control operation tomorrow at dawn." "That's illegal while he's out on bail," Nathan protested. "Technically, he's claiming they'll stay on private property and only shoot if wolves cross the boundary. He's exploiting a loophole in the management plan." Nathan felt cold dread settling in his stomach. "They're setting up an ambush. Aurora's pack crosses that southeastern corner regularly. Our tracking data confirms it. I've alerted state wildlife officials, but they're understaffed and can't guarantee response before tomorrow morning." Eleanor paused. "Nathan, I'm telling you this unofficially. As park superintendent, I can't condone any interference with private property rights." The subtext was clear. She was warning him, but couldn't officially stop Blackwood. "Understood," Nathan replied. "Thanks for the information." He rejoined Thomas and Rebecca, quickly explaining the situation. "We need to prevent the pack from crossing onto Blackwood's property," Thomas said immediately. "How?" Rebecca asked. "We can't exactly call them on the phone." Nathan stared across the valley toward the invisible boundary that separated protected federal land from Blackwood's ranch. "We need to alter their movement pattern, create a disruption that will push them deeper into the park instead of toward the boundary." "Like a controlled burn?" Thomas suggested. "Park Service does those sometimes to manage wildlife movement." "Too slow and too much red tape," Nathan shook his head. "We need something immediate." Rebecca was reviewing the tracking data on her tablet. "The pack follows game trails along this ridge before dropping down to that southeastern corner. If we could block the main trail—" "Physical barriers won't stop them," Nathan said. "They'll just go around." "What about scent markers?" Thomas suggested. "In law school, I did a paper on non-lethal predator deterrence. Some ranchers use wolf urine from other territories to create artificial boundaries." Nathan considered this. "We don't have access to that. But we do have something that might work. Clothing with human scent, strategically placed along with visual deterrence." They spent the afternoon implementing their makeshift plan, placing strips of fabric torn from their spare clothes along with small reflective markers at key points along the game trails leading toward Blackwood's property. Nathan knew it was a long shot. Wolves were intelligent and adaptable, but it was their only option. As sunset approached, they positioned themselves on a high ridge with clear views of both the parkland and the boundary of Blackwood's property. Through high-powered binoculars, they could see movement at the ranch, trucks arriving, men with rifles gathering. "At least 6 of them," Thomas reported grimly. "They're setting up positions along the fence line. This isn't predator control, Nathan said. It's a vendetta. Night fell, cold and clear, a three-quarter moon providing enough light to maintain visibility through their night vision equipment. Around midnight, Rebecca spotted Aurora's pack moving along the northern ridge, heading directly toward their scent barriers. They've made a kill earlier, Nathan noted, observing their movement pattern. They're not actively hunting now, just traveling. Straight toward Blackwood's ambush, Thomas added tensely. The minutes stretched painfully as they watched the pack approach the first line of deterrence. Aurora paused, clearly detecting the human scent markers. She circled, sniffing cautiously, the other wolves following her lead. "Come on," Nathan whispered. "Turn back." Aurora looked directly toward their observation point, nearly half a mile away, as if she could sense their presence. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, she stood motionless, her pack waiting behind her. Then she turned, leading her pack away from the boundary, taking an alternate route that curved back into the heart of the park. The three observers released a collective breath. "It worked," Rebecca said, amazement in her voice. She understood. "For tonight," Nathan cautioned. "But we can't maintain this kind of intervention indefinitely." Thomas was still watching through binoculars. "Movement at the Blackwood property. They've spotted something." Nathan refocused his own binoculars on the boundary. A smaller wolf, not part of Aurora's pack, was moving parallel to the fence line, unaware of the danger waiting in the darkness. "They're going to shoot," Nathan realized with horror. "That's a juvenile from the Canyon pack." Before Thomas could stop him, Nathan grabbed a powerful flashlight and began signaling in broad sweeps, hoping to startle the young wolf away from the boundary. The beam cut through the darkness, immediately catching the attention of both the wolf and the waiting hunters. The wolf bolted away from the light, but not before a rifle shot cracked through the night. The animal yelped and stumbled, but continued running into the cover of trees. "They shot it," Rebecca gasped. "On park land." More shots followed, not at the retreating wolf, but toward the source of the flashlight, toward Nathan. "Get down!" Thomas tackled his father as bullets whined overhead, splintering the bark of pines behind them. "They're shooting at us," Rebecca whispered, horrified, pressing herself flat against the ground. "They think we're wolves," Nathan said. "Or they don't care." For 20 terrifying minutes they remained motionless in the dirt as occasional shots rang out, seemingly random now, the shooters firing blindly into the darkness. Finally the shooting stopped, replaced by the distant sound of vehicles starting up. "They're leaving," Thomas said, cautiously raising his head. "We need to find that wounded wolf," Nathan insisted, already gathering his equipment. "Dad, it's too dangerous. Those men are still out there. They're drunk and they're armed." "That wolf is injured on park land by illegal hunting," Nathan replied firmly. "I'm going. You two head back to the vehicle and call it in." Thomas recognized the set of his father's jaw, the same expression he'd seen in childhood when Nathan had made up his mind. "I'm coming with you," he said, leaving no room for argument. Rebecca reluctantly agreed to return to their vehicle and contact park rangers. Armed with first aid supplies and tracking equipment, Nathan and Thomas set off into the darkness, following the probable path of the injured wolf. The blood trail was sporadic but visible under their flashlights, bright crimson against fallen leaves and pine needles. They moved as quietly as possible, aware that the wounded animal would be frightened and potentially dangerous. "The blood's getting heavier," Nathan whispered after nearly an hour of tracking. "It's slowing down." They found the young wolf collapsed in a small clearing, its breathing labored, a bullet wound visible in its hind leg. Nathan approached cautiously, tranquilizer gun ready, but the animal was too weak to flee or fight. "Exit wound is clean," he assessed after a careful examination. "Missed the femoral artery, but there's significant muscle damage." Working together with the practiced coordination that had developed over weeks of field research, Father and son cleaned and bandaged the wound, administered antibiotics, and fitted a tracking collar to the unconscious wolf. "We need to move it deeper into the park," Nathan decided. "If it wakes up near the boundary, it might stumble back into danger." They fashioned a makeshift stretcher from their jackets and branches, carefully lifting the sedated animal. The work was exhausting, each step through the rugged terrain requiring careful balance and coordination. Dawn was breaking as they finally reached a sheltered ravine nearly 2 miles from the boundary, far enough for safety once the young wolf regained consciousness. "We should get back," Thomas said, checking his watch. "Rebecca will be worried." As they turned to leave, Nathan froze. Standing at the edge of the ravine, silhouetted against the rising sun, was Aurora. Behind her, partially obscured by trees, waited the rest of her pack. "Don't move," Nathan whispered, though the warning was unnecessary. Thomas stood transfixed, witnessing something few humans ever saw, a wild wolf pack at close range. Aurora's gaze moved from the men to the unconscious young wolf, her posture alert but not aggressive. She took several steps forward, scenting the air cautiously. "She recognizes me," Nathan said softly, wonder in his voice. "Or your scent from the rehabilitation," Thomas suggested, equally quiet. Aurora approached the wounded wolf, sniffing the bandaged leg, then looked directly at Nathan, a gaze that seemed to contain more understanding than should be possible from a wild animal. Then, with a soft, huffing sound, she retreated, disappearing into the trees with her pack. "Did you see that?" Thomas asked, awe in his voice. "She was checking on it. Wolves sometimes adopt lone individuals into their packs," Nathan explained, though he too was stunned by the encounter. "But I've never seen anything like this. A pack leader inspecting an injured wolf from another pack." They made their way back to the meeting point where Rebecca waited anxiously with 2 park rangers. After giving their statements about the illegal shooting and their emergency treatment of the wounded wolf, Nathan insisted on returning to the observation blind. "You need rest," Thomas protested. "We've been up all night." "I need to understand what's happening with these wolves," Nathan replied. "This goes beyond normal behavior patterns." Back at their observation point, fueled by coffee and adrenaline, they watched as Aurora's pack returned to the ravine where they'd left the injured wolf. Through telephoto lenses, they observed as the pack surrounded the now conscious young wolf, not with aggression but with what appeared to be acceptance. "They're adopting it," Rebecca confirmed, recording everything. "This contradicts established understanding of territorial pack behavior." "Unless Aurora is creating something new," Nathan said quietly. "A different kind of pack structure based on need rather than bloodlines." As the day progressed, they documented the pack's careful integration of the wounded wolf, how they brought it food from a recent kill, how the white-tailed male, Aurora's son, stayed particularly close to the newcomer. By late afternoon, exhaustion overtook even Nathan's stubborn determination. They returned to the cabin where Nathan immediately downloaded their observation data while Thomas prepared a simple meal. "You should sleep," Thomas admonished, setting a plate of food beside his father. "Soon," Nathan promised, not looking away from his computer screen. "I need to compile this data for the research team. What we're seeing with Aurora's pack could change our entire understanding of wolf social structures." Thomas recognized the familiar intensity, the same focus that had kept Nathan in the field during family holidays, that had driven him to track migrations through blizzards and floods. The dedication that had both inspired and infuriated Thomas throughout his childhood. "Mom understood this part of you better than I did," Thomas said, sitting across from his father. "In her letters, she wrote about your magnificent obsession, how your ability to lose yourself in the natural world was what made you exceptional at your work." Nathan finally looked up, fatigue evident in the lines of his face. "I lost myself too often, including when she needed me most." She didn't see it that way, Thomas countered gently. She said your passion was why she fell in love with you. She wanted me to understand that. A notification pinged on Nathan's computer, an email from Eleanor. Blackwood's been arrested, he announced after reading it. One of his own men turned on him, admitted the shooting was planned and that Blackwood ordered them to fire at any lights or movement, knowing researchers were in the area. That's attempted murder, Thomas said, the lawyer in him immediately assessing the implications. And the end of his influence in this community, Nathan added with grim satisfaction. The email says the governor's office is distancing itself from him. They're even fast-tracking approval for expanded research on Aurora's pack. The victory should have felt sweeter, but Nathan found himself troubled by a nagging concern he couldn't quite articulate. He pushed away from the computer, suddenly aware of his bone-deep exhaustion. "You're right," he told Thomas. "I need sleep." But as he lay in bed, drifting toward unconsciousness, Nathan's mind returned to Aurora, her intelligent eyes, her adaptive behavior, the way she seemed to recognize him despite months in the wild. There was something there, something important that hovered just beyond his understanding. His last thought before sleep claimed him was a memory of Catherine reading Jack London to a young Thomas, her voice soft in the glow of a bedside lamp. There is an ecstasy that marks the summit of life and beyond which life cannot rise. Nathan woke to the sound of his phone ringing persistently. Outside, weak November sunlight filtered through frost-covered windows. He fumbled for the device, registering the time, 2:17 p.m. He'd slept for nearly 10 hours. "Reed," he answered, voice rough with sleep. "Nathan, it's Eleanor. We have a situation with the Canyon Pack juvenile, the one you treated. It's on the move, and the tracking data suggests it's heading toward Aurora's territory." Nathan sat up, instantly alert. That's unusual. Injured wolves typically stay in familiar territory. "There's more," Eleanor continued. "The Weather Service has issued a severe storm warning for the northern range. Temperature drop of 30 degrees, heavy snow, wind gusts up to 50 miles per hour. It's moving in faster than expected. Full conditions by nightfall." Nathan glanced out the window. The deceptively calm afternoon sky belied the approaching storm. November in Yellowstone could turn deadly with little warning. "All personnel are being pulled from the backcountry," Eleanor added, "including your research team." "Understood. We'll pack up the observation blind and head back." Nathan was already calculating the fastest route from their current position. Thomas appeared in the doorway holding a mug of coffee, his expression questioning. "Storm coming," Nathan explained, covering the phone. "We need to clear out." "One more thing," Eleanor's voice dropped to a more personal tone. "Blackwood made bail again. Family money and connections. His attorney is arguing self-defense against trespassing researchers. Be careful out there." After ending the call, Nathan quickly explained the situation to Thomas while pulling on cold weather gear. Rebecca joined them from the guest room, already checking weather updates on her tablet. "The front is accelerating," she reported. "Barometric pressure dropping rapidly. We need to collect the equipment from the observation blind before the storm hits," Nathan decided. 3 hours round trip if we move quickly." Thomas looked skeptical. "Maybe we should leave the equipment. It's not worth the risk." "There's irreplaceable data on the local drives," Nathan countered. "And some of that equipment is specialized, 6-month back order. We go now, we can be back before the worst hits." The drive to the trailhead was tense, all three watching the northwestern sky where dark clouds were building with unnatural speed. They hiked quickly to the blind, working with practiced efficiency to dismantle cameras, sensors, and recording equipment. "Temperatures dropping fast," Rebecca noted, checking a handheld thermometer. "Down 12 degrees in the last hour." Nathan glanced at the sky. The storm was moving faster than predicted, the cloud front rolling over the mountains like a dark tide. "We need to move." "Now." They were halfway back to the vehicle when the first heavy snowflakes began to fall, carried on a wind that cut through their layers like a knife. Within minutes, visibility had dropped to less than 50 yards, the trail becoming treacherous with ice and fresh powder. "Stay close," Nathan called over the rising wind. "Follow my footsteps exactly." The comfortable weight of his pack had become a burden, equipment banging against his back as he navigated the increasingly difficult terrain. His breath came in white plumes, freezing in his beard and eyebrows. Despite the exertion, he could feel cold seeping into his extremities. A sharp crack overhead sent them scrambling as a snow-laden branch gave way, crashing down mere feet from where they stood. "We need shelter," Thomas shouted against the wind. "This is getting dangerous." Nathan knew his son was right, but the vehicle was still at least a mile away through increasingly hazardous conditions. He quickly assessed their options. "There's an old ranger cabin half a mile east," he decided, "used for backcountry patrols. Basic but solid." They altered course, Nathan navigating partly by memory and partly by the GPS unit that was struggling in the worsening conditions. The snow was falling so heavily now that their tracks were disappearing almost as soon as they were made. The cabin appeared suddenly through the whiteness, a small, sturdy structure of weathered logs nearly invisible against the surrounding pines. Nathan fumbled with frozen fingers at the padlock, using his Park Service key to gain entry. Inside was cold but blissfully windless. A small wood stove stood in one corner, a stack of seasoned firewood beside it. Basic emergency supplies occupied shelves along one wall. Standard backcountry protocol. "Signal's gone," Rebecca reported, checking her phone. "But I got a text through to Eleanor before we lost coverage." "She knows our location." Thomas was already working on the wood stove, arranging kindling with the skill of someone who had grown up in mountain country. Within minutes, a small fire was growing, pushing back the chill. "We might be here overnight," Nathan said, taking inventory of the supplies. "But we're well stocked. Emergency rations, water, first aid kit, extra blankets." As feeling returned to his extremities, Nathan became aware of a persistent ache in his left arm and chest. He dismissed it as muscle strain from carrying the heavy pack in difficult conditions. "Dad, you okay?" Thomas was watching him with concern. "You look pale." "Fine," Nathan assured him, rubbing his arm absently. "Just tired. Not as young as I used to be." The storm intensified as darkness fell, wind howling around the cabin's eaves, snow accumulating against the single window until it blocked half the glass. The interior had warmed to a tolerable temperature, and they huddled near the stove, sharing a meal of emergency rations. "At least we saved the data," Rebecca said, attempting to lighten the mood as she patted the waterproof case containing their hard drives. Nathan nodded, but his attention was focused inward. The pain in his chest had grown more insistent, a band of pressure that made each breath slightly labored. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cabin's modest temperature. Thomas was watching him intently. "Dad, what's wrong? And don't say nothing because I can see something's not right." "Just some discomfort," Nathan admitted. "Probably pulled something carrying the equipment." Rebecca moved closer, professional concern in her expression. "Where exactly does it hurt?" "Left side, chest and arm." Even saying it aloud triggered alarm bells in Nathan's mind. He knew the symptoms of cardiac distress. They'd all had wilderness first aid training. Rebecca immediately switched to emergency assessment mode, checking his pulse, which was rapid and slightly irregular. "Nathan, I need you to be honest. Scale of 1 to 10, how's the pain?" "Started as a 3, now maybe a 6. Nathan tried to downplay it, but the tightness was becoming harder to ignore. "It's probably nothing. We need to get you out of here," Thomas said firmly. "Cardiac symptoms aren't something to wait out." "In this?" Nathan gestured toward the window where only swirling whiteness was visible. "Nobody's going anywhere tonight." Rebecca was already rummaging through the first aid kit. "There's aspirin. That might help. And we need to keep you warm and minimize exertion." The next few hours passed in tense vigilance. The pain would ease slightly, then return with greater intensity. Nathan tried to remain calm, focusing on his breathing, but he could see the growing worry in Thomas's eyes. "Tell me about the law firm," Nathan said, attempting distraction. "Before Blackwood, what kind of cases were you working on?" Thomas played along, describing his work in environmental law, his voice deliberately casual, though his eyes never stopped monitoring his father's condition. By midnight, Nathan could no longer pretend. The pain had become a crushing pressure, radiating down his left arm and up into his jaw. Cold sweat soaked his shirt, and his breathing had become shallow and difficult. "Heart attack," he acknowledged finally, his voice tight. "Not just chest pain." Thomas was immediately on his feet. "We have to get help. The storm has to break sometime." "It's a 3-day system," Rebecca said quietly. "But I can try to hike out at first light. The ranger station is 8 miles, but if I can get to higher ground, maybe I can get a signal." Nathan shook his head, the movement sending a fresh wave of pain through his chest. "Too dangerous. Whiteout conditions, negative temperatures, you'd never make it. So we just sit here and watch you?" Thomas stopped, emotion choking his words. Nathan reached for his son's hand, surprised by how weak his grip felt. "There's a satellite emergency beacon in the supply cache, red box, top shelf, for true emergencies." Rebecca retrieved it immediately. The device was simple, a single button protected by a plastic cover, designed to transmit GPS coordinates to emergency services. "This is definitely an emergency," she said, activating the beacon. A small light began blinking steadily. "Now we wait." The night stretched endlessly. Nathan drifted between painful consciousness and uneasy sleep, aware of Thomas constantly at his side, checking his pulse, adjusting blankets, offering water in small sips. The pain ebbed and flowed, but never fully receded. During one lucid period near dawn, Nathan gestured Thomas closer. "Catherine's letters," he whispered. "In my desk at home. Bottom drawer. There's one I haven't shown you. She wrote it for this kind of situation." "Don't talk like that," Thomas said sharply. "You're going to be fine." "Just listen," Nathan insisted. "The research on Aurora's pack, it's important. Not just scientifically, there's something special happening there. Promise me you'll continue it." "We'll continue it together," Thomas replied, his voice firm despite the moisture gathering in his eyes. As weak daylight filtered through the snow-crusted window, Nathan's condition deteriorated rapidly. His breathing became more labored, his skin taking on a grayish pallor. Rebecca checked the emergency beacon repeatedly, confirming it was still transmitting. "Help will come," she assured them both, though uncertainty was clear in her voice. "The signal is strong." Nathan was finding it increasingly difficult to focus, the pain now a constant presence. In his semi-delirious state, he thought he heard scratching at the cabin door, probably wind-driven branches against the logs. The sound came again, more deliberate. Thomas exchanged confused glances with Rebecca before moving cautiously to the door. "Probably a pine marten," Rebecca suggested. "They're attracted to warmth in storms." Thomas cracked the door open against the driving snow and froze. Standing on the small porch, covered in snow, was a large wolf, silver-gray with distinctive amber eyes. "Aurora," Nathan whispered from across the room, his voice barely audible. The wolf didn't enter but stood motionless in the doorway, gaze fixed on Nathan's prone form. Behind her, barely visible through the swirling snow, were the shadowy forms of her pack. "This isn't possible," Rebecca breathed. "They wouldn't approach a human structure like this." but Nathan understood with sudden clarity. "The tracking collar," he managed. "On the Juvenile." She followed it, found us instead. Whether drawn by the beacon's electronic signal tracking their scent through the storm or by some inexplicable instinct, Aurora had found them, miles from her normal territory, in blizzard conditions that would challenge even a wolf's navigational abilities. Thomas stood paralyzed, unsure whether to close the door against a wild predator or to acknowledge the extraordinary moment unfolding. The wolf made no aggressive move, simply maintaining her position, her breath creating clouds of vapor in the frigid air. "Let her be," Nathan said, a strange calm settling over him despite the pain. "She's not a threat." For nearly 10 minutes Aurora remained at the threshold, as if standing guard. Then, as suddenly as she had appeared, she turned and vanished into the whiteness, her pack following like shadows. "Did that really happen?" Thomas asked, finally closing the door against the cold. Rebecca was already checking the GPS tracker on her tablet. The Juvenile is nearby. The whole pack is... They've been circling this area for hours." Nathan closed his eyes, a faint smile touching his lips despite the pain. He had understood something fundamental about Aurora in that moment of connection, something that transcended scientific classification and behavioral studies. The day passed in painful, slow motion. Nathan's condition continued to deteriorate, his periods of consciousness becoming shorter and less coherent. Thomas never left his side, talking continuously about shared memories, future plans, anything to maintain a connection. By late afternoon, Nathan was struggling for each breath, his pulse weak and erratic. Thomas had abandoned any pretense of optimism, tears flowing freely as he held his father's hand. "Dad, please," he begged. "Just hold on. Help will come." Through the fog of pain and approaching unconsciousness, Nathan heard a new sound, a rhythmic thumping that seemed to vibrate through the cabin's walls. It grew louder, more insistent. "Helicopter!" Rebecca exclaimed, rushing to the window and scraping away the frost. "Search and rescue!" The next hours passed in a blur for Nathan. Emergency medical technicians bursting through the door, the sharp sting of an IV line, oxygen mask covering his face, the disorienting sensation of being strapped to a backboard, carried through swirling snow to the waiting helicopter. Thomas's face appeared above him, saying something Nathan couldn't hear over the rotor noise. Then darkness claimed him, the pain finally receding as consciousness slipped away. He dreamed of running through snow-covered forests, moving with effortless speed alongside silver shadows. Aurora ran beside him, leading him through moonlit clearings and hidden valleys he had never seen before. In the dream, he understood her completely, and she him, two beings connected by something deeper than circumstance. When Nathan next opened his eyes, he was in a hospital room, the steady beep of cardiac monitors replacing the howl of wind. Thomas was asleep in a chair beside the bed, his face showing the strain of extended worry. "Thomas," Nathan whispered, his voice rough from the breathing tube that had been removed. His son jerked awake, momentary confusion giving way to profound relief. "Dad, you're awake. Thank God." Nathan tried to sit up, immediately regretting the movement as pain flared in his chest. "Easy," Thomas cautioned, adjusting the bed controls to raise Nathan slightly. "You've had a major heart attack. They put in 2 stents. Doctor says you're incredibly lucky. Another hour without treatment and—" He didn't need to finish the sentence. Nathan nodded weakly, memories of the cabin, the storm, and Aurora's unexpected appearance flooding back. "How did they find us?" he asked. "In that storm?" Thomas looked uncertain. "The medical team said it was the emergency beacon, but—" "Dad, there's something strange. The search coordinator told me they almost missed us. The beacon signal was weak, and the storm was grounding most aircraft. They were about to call off the search when they picked up unusual movement patterns on their wildlife tracking systems. Aurora's pack, Nathan said with certainty. They said a group of collared wolves was moving in an unusual circular pattern around a fixed point, our cabin. The tight formation showed up on their tracking maps, creating a clear target in the middle of the whiteout. That's how they found us. Nathan closed his eyes, a complex mixture of emotions washing over him. The wolves, Aurora's pack, had quite possibly saved his life, creating a living signal that guided rescuers to their location. "Where's Rebecca?" he asked. "Getting coffee. She's been here the whole time, too." Thomas hesitated. "Dad, while you were unconscious, I read Mom's final letter, the one you mentioned." Nathan's throat tightened. "She wrote it when she knew she wouldn't recover. Asked me not to open it until I needed it most." "She knew you'd be alone in the field someday," Thomas said softly. "She wrote that your passion for wilderness was what made you exceptional, but that it might also be what took you away too soon. She asked me to forgive both of you and to find my own connection to the natural world you loved so much." A tear slipped down Nathan's cheek. "Catherine always understood me better than I understood myself." "She also said that sometimes the most profound connections come from unexpected places," Thomas added. "I think she would have appreciated the irony of a wolf pack saving your life." Outside the hospital window, snow continued to fall gently, the violent storm having passed during Nathan's unconsciousness. Somewhere in the vast wilderness of Yellowstone, Aurora led her unusual pack through ancient hunting grounds, adapting and surviving against all odds, just as Nathan had done. He drifted back to sleep with the image of amber eyes in his mind, and the knowledge that sometimes salvation comes from the very creatures we seek to save. The hospital room felt increasingly confining as Nathan's recovery progressed. 3 weeks of cardiac rehabilitation had strengthened his body, but confinement had weakened his spirit. He stood at the window watching snow fall on the mountains in the distance when Thomas arrived with unexpected news. "Eleanor's here," he announced, holding the door for the park superintendent. Eleanor looked different in civilian clothes, less official, more human. She carried a thick folder and wore an expression Nathan couldn't quite read. "You're looking better," she said, taking the chair Thomas offered. "The doctors say you're making remarkable progress." "Not remarkable enough to get back in the field," Nathan replied with poorly concealed frustration. "They're talking about desk duty for 6 months." Eleanor exchanged glances with Thomas. "That's actually related to why I'm here. Something's come up that I think you should know about." She opened the folder, revealing photographs, documents, and what appeared to be old research papers. "After Blackwood's arrest, we executed a search warrant on his property. Most of it was related to the poaching and assault charges, but we found something unexpected in his private office." She handed Nathan a faded photograph. It showed a research facility with government vehicles parked outside. The sign read, "Northern Rocky Mountain Wolf Research Station, authorized personnel only." "I've never heard of this facility," Nathan said, studying the image. "Because it was deliberately erased from public record," Eleanor explained. "It operated from 1989 to 1995 as a joint project between the Department of Interior and university researchers." Thomas leaned closer. "What were they researching?" Eleanor hesitated. "Wolf intelligence and behavioral adaptability. Specifically, they were studying whether wolves could develop more complex problem-solving abilities and social structures when faced with environmental challenges." Nathan felt a chill that had nothing to do with his recovery. Where was this facility located? "About 15 miles north of Blackwood's Ranch on what is now private land. It was shut down during budget cuts in the mid-90s, and all the research animals were supposed to be relocated to wildlife sanctuaries." "Supposed to be?" Nathan repeated, understanding dawning. But they weren't. Eleanor nodded grimly. According to these records, at least 3 of the research subjects were released into the wild instead, against protocol. They were young females, approximately 2 years old at the time. And one of them was Aurora, Nathan said with certainty. The age and physical characteristics match, Eleanor confirmed, and this explains her unusual problem-solving abilities and social behavior. She wasn't just a random wolf that survived poaching. She's the offspring of research subjects who were specifically studied for advanced cognition and adaptive behavior. Thomas was paging through the documents. This explains Blackwood's obsession. Look at this. He held up a yellowed newspaper clipping that showed a younger Victor Blackwood shaking hands with a man in a lab coat. The caption identified him as Dr. Alan Blackwood, the research facility's director. His brother. Eleanor nodded. Victor knew about the program and the wolves that were released. He's been tracking them for years, trying to eliminate evidence of the illegal release. Which is why he focused on Aurora specifically, Nathan realized. She was living proof of the unauthorized release and possibly of the entire research program. What exactly were they doing at this facility? Eleanor's expression grew more troubled. The documents are incomplete, but they suggest the researchers were using environmental enrichment and specialized training to enhance natural abilities. Nothing genetic or what you'd call science fiction, just intensive environmental conditioning. But it was controversial even then, and when funding was cut, the proper protocols for shutting down the program weren't followed. And Blackwood knew his brother was involved in something potentially scandalous, Thomas added. He's been covering it up ever since, eliminating the wolves one by one. Nathan returned to the window, processing this revelation. Aurora wasn't just any wolf. She was the descendant of animals that had been part of a specialized research program, one that had cultivated problem-solving skills and social adaptability. It explained her extraordinary behavior, her apparent recognition of Nathan, and her pack's unusual hunting patterns. "Does anyone else know about this?" he asked finally. "Just the 3 of us, Rebecca, and 2 trusted colleagues in wildlife forensics who helped authenticate the documents," Eleanor assured him. "I wanted your input before deciding how to proceed." Nathan considered the implications. If this goes public, Aurora and her pack will become scientific curiosities. They'll be tracked, studied, possibly even captured for further research. But their unique behavior could revolutionize our understanding of wildlife adaptation, Thomas pointed out. The selective predation alone has huge implications for disease management. "There's something else," Eleanor added, her voice softer. "The documents suggest that Aurora's mother, one of the original research subjects, was released in the area where your cabin is located. She would have been the foundation breeding female for the Wapiti Lake Pack." Nathan felt the pieces falling into place. "That's why Aurora seemed to recognize me, or at least my scent from the rehabilitation. Her pack had been in that territory for generations. She wasn't just a random wolf I saved. Our paths were connected long before I found her in that trap." The 3 fell silent, each contemplating the weight of this discovery. Eventually, Thomas spoke. "So what do we do with this information?" Eleanor looked to Nathan. "That's partly why I'm here. As the lead researcher on Aurora's pack, your recommendation carries significant weight." Nathan thought carefully, weighing scientific value against Aurora's freedom and safety. "We continue the research on selective predation and social structure, but we keep the origins confidential for now. The behavior itself is valuable enough without the backstory, and it protects Aurora from becoming a laboratory curiosity." "And Blackwood?" Thomas asked. "The poaching and assault charges will keep him occupied," Eleanor said. "But we should digitize these records and secure them properly. If his case goes to trial, this information might become relevant." After Eleanor left, Thomas remained, watching his father with concern. "How are you processing all this?" Nathan sank into the chair beside the window. "It's a lot to take in. Everything I thought I knew about Aurora, about my connection with her. It's all different now." "Is it?" Thomas challenged gently. "You still saved her life. She still led her pack to surround our cabin during the storm, creating a pattern that helped rescuers find us. The context has changed, but the connection remains." Nathan nodded slowly. "Your mother would have appreciated the poetry of it. All those years studying wolves, and the one that made the greatest impact wasn't entirely wild after all." "Neither are we," Thomas pointed out. "We're all shaped by our environments, our experiences." "Aurora's unusual background doesn't make her any less a wolf, just a different kind of wolf than we expected." The next day brought another visitor, Rebecca, carrying her laptop and barely contained excitement. "You have to see this," she said by way of greeting. "New footage from the northern boundary cameras." Nathan and Thomas gathered around as she played the video. It showed Aurora's pack moving through a snow-covered meadow, now 11 strong. The injured juvenile they had treated was fully integrated, moving confidently among the others. Most remarkably, the pack had divided their hunting territory into what appeared to be intentional zones, systematically covering areas with high concentrations of elk. "They're creating a modified territory pattern," Rebecca explained. "Instead of defending a traditional bounded area, they're establishing hunting corridors that follow the CWD-affected herds. It's completely unprecedented." "And incredibly effective," Nathan noted. "Look at how they're communicating. Those aren't random movements." As they watched, Aurora paused on a ridge, looking directly at the camera as if aware of being observed. The moment lasted only seconds before she continued leading her pack, but it sent a shiver through Nathan. "She knows we're watching," he said softly. "That's impossible," Rebecca replied automatically, then hesitated. "But after what Eleanor told me about her origins, I don't know what's impossible anymore." The doctors discharged Nathan the following week with strict instructions about medication, diet, and limited physical activity. Thomas had temporarily relocated to Nathan's cabin, converting the living room into a remote office for his legal work while helping his father with recovery. The enforced proximity had created a new rhythm between them. Morning coffee on the porch, watching winter birds, evenings reviewing research data, and legal briefs by the fire. The years of estrangement gradually dissolved as they established a relationship based not on the past, but on shared purpose and rediscovered respect. One evening, as they reviewed the latest tracking data from Aurora's pack, Thomas broached the subject they had both been avoiding. "Eleanor asked me to represent the Park Service in the Blackwood case," he said, "as outside counsel, given my environmental law background." Nathan looked up from the maps. "And you're considering it?" "I am." Thomas set aside his laptop. "But it would mean diving deep into the documents about the research facility, possibly even making some of it public record." "You're concerned about Aurora?" Thomas nodded. "Once this information is in court documents, it becomes accessible. Aurora could become a target for researchers, media, even wildlife collectors. Everything she represents, everything you've worked to understand, could be compromised." Nathan was quiet for a long moment, considering. "There might be another approach. What if we focus on the illegal poaching activities and the assault charges, but keep the research facility history as leverage rather than evidence?" "Meaning?" "Blackwood's primary concern has always been protecting his family name and hiding his brother's involvement in the unauthorized release. If he knew we had that information, but were willing to keep it confidential in exchange for a guilty plea on the other charges." Thomas's expression shifted from concern to thoughtful consideration. "A plea deal that protects both sides' interests. It's unorthodox, but it might work." The strategy proved effective. Victor Blackwood, facing the possibility of his family's secrets becoming public record, accepted a plea agreement that included substantial fines, 2 years of house arrest, and the permanent surrender of hunting and firearms licenses. In exchange, the documents regarding the research facility remained sealed, accessible only to a small team of authorized researchers. Winter deepened, blanketing Yellowstone in pristine white. Nathan's recovery progressed steadily, though he chafed at the restrictions on field work. Instead, he channeled his energy into developing new research protocols for Aurora's pack, methods that would gather valuable data while minimizing human interference. In late January, Eleanor arrived at the cabin with news that changed everything. "The research committee has approved your proposal," she announced, stamping snow from her boots in the entryway. "Full funding for 3 years, with you as project director despite your medical leave." "That's fantastic," Thomas said, pouring coffee for their visitor. "Dad's been working on those protocols for weeks." "There's more," Eleanor continued. "They've authorized the construction of a new observation facility specifically designed for long-term wolf behavior studies. Remote cameras, minimal human presence, state-of-the-art tracking technology." "Where?" Nathan asked. "That's the interesting part." "The committee wants to locate it on the northern boundary, right where Aurora's pack has established their primary hunting corridor." Nathan frowned. "That could disrupt their patterns. We'd be introducing a human element into exactly the behavior we're trying to study." "That's what I told them," Eleanor agreed. "Which is why I proposed an alternative location." She unfolded a map on the kitchen table, pointing to a ridge overlooking a valley where Aurora's pack had been frequently documented. "This location provides excellent sight lines without interfering with established routes, and—" she hesitated, "it's on Blackwood's former property." "What?" Thomas and Nathan spoke simultaneously. Part of his plea agreement included surrendering the northern section of his ranch to conservation easement, Eleanor explained. "The section that borders the park. It's being transferred to the Yellowstone Foundation next month." Nathan studied the map, emotion tightening his throat. The location was perfect, elevated enough for observation but distant enough to minimize interference and strategically positioned to monitor the pack's movements without disrupting them. "There's something else," Eleanor added, her voice softening. "The committee wants to name it after you. The Reed Wolf Research Station." Nathan shook his head immediately. "No, that's not. It shouldn't be about me." "Dad," Thomas began, but Nathan cut him off. "If it needs a name, call it the Aurora Project," he insisted. "This has always been about her, not me." Eleanor nodded, understanding in her eyes. "I'll suggest it. But they'll still want to acknowledge your contribution somehow." After she left, Thomas found his father standing on the porch despite the cold, gazing toward the distant mountains where Aurora's pack roamed. "You okay?" Thomas asked, joining him with an extra jacket. "Just thinking about connections," Nathan replied. "How we're all linked in ways we don't fully understand. Aurora's unusual origins, Catherine's letters, your legal expertise, my heart attack, all these seemingly random events creating a pattern that led to something important." "Mom would have called it fate," Thomas said with a small smile. "Science doesn't recognize fate," Nathan countered automatically, then softened. "But there are patterns in nature we don't fully comprehend, connections that transcend simple cause and effect." The revelation about Aurora's origins had initially troubled Nathan, challenging his understanding of their connection. But with time and reflection, he had come to see it differently. Aurora was neither fully wild nor fully domesticated. She existed in a unique space between worlds, carrying the intelligence and adaptability of her research subject ancestors while embodying the freedom and natural instincts of a wild wolf. In that way, perhaps she wasn't so different from humans, creatures shaped by both nature and nurture, capable of forming connections that defied simple categorization. 2 days later, Thomas accompanied Nathan to his cardiology appointment, where they received unexpected news. "Your recovery is progressing remarkably well," Dr. Keller said, reviewing the latest test results. "The damage was less extensive than we initially feared, and your cardiac function has improved significantly." "So I can return to fieldwork sooner?" Nathan asked hopefully. The doctor smiled. "Not immediately, but I'm comfortable modifying the restrictions. Limited field observation, no strenuous hiking or extreme conditions, would be acceptable with proper precautions." It was more than Nathan had dared hope for. On the drive back to the cabin, he was uncharacteristically quiet, processing the implications. "Everything okay?" Thomas asked. "I thought you'd be celebrating." "I am," Nathan assured him. "Just thinking about next steps. The Aurora project will need a field director who can implement the protocols we've developed, someone who understands the pack's behavior and the scientific significance of their hunting patterns." Thomas glanced sideways at his father. "You're not thinking of stepping back, are you?" "Not stepping back. Stepping aside." Nathan turned to face his son. "I'm nominating Rebecca for the field director position with me as research advisor during my recovery, and I'd like you to consider staying on as legal counsel for the project." Thomas was quiet for a moment, considering. "I'd have to restructure my practice, maybe take on a partner to handle the routine cases." "If it's not what you want—" "No," Thomas interrupted. "It's exactly what I want. I just needed to hear myself say it out loud." He smiled. "Mom would approve, I think. Both of us working to protect something important." That evening, as a soft snow fell outside the cabin windows, Nathan opened Catherine's final letter again. Her words, written during her last days, seemed to reach across time with new meaning. "My dearest Nathan, I've always believed that love doesn't end with death. It transforms. Look for me in the patterns of the natural world you cherish, in the connections between living things, in the unexpected moments of grace that remind us we're part of something larger than ourselves. And when you find those connections, know that I am there with you still." Spring came to Yellowstone in subtle shifts, longer days, the drip of melting snow from pine boughs, green shoots pushing through still frozen earth. Nathan stood on the newly constructed observation deck of the Aurora Project Research Station, binoculars trained on the valley below where patches of brown earth had emerged from winter's white blanket. 6 months had passed since his heart attack. The cardiac rehabilitation was complete, and though he still carried nitroglycerin tablets in his pocket and tired more easily than before, he had regained much of his former strength. His role as research advisor rather than field director had proven unexpectedly satisfying, allowing him to mentor younger scientists while contributing his decades of experience to the project's methodologies. "Movement at the eastern ridge," Rebecca called softly from her position at the spotting scope. Now the official field director of the Aurora project, she had grown more confident in her leadership, guiding a small team of researchers with quiet authority. Nathan shifted his binoculars, catching sight of the distinctive silver coat that never failed to stir something in his chest. Aurora moved with purposeful grace along the ridgeline, followed by her pack, now 13 strong and thriving despite the harsh winter. "She's looking healthy," Thomas observed, joining them with 3 steaming mugs of coffee. His legal practice had evolved to include a satellite office in Gardner, allowing him to split his time between environmental law cases in Bozeman and his role as legal counsel for the Aurora project. Nathan accepted the coffee gratefully. "The whole pack looks good. The selective predation strategy has proven remarkably successful. They've maintained consistent nutrition throughout winter while eliminating diseased animals from the elk population. The preliminary CWD infection data supports your hypothesis," Rebecca added. Infection rates are down nearly 18% in areas where Aurora's pack has been hunting regularly. The discovery had significant implications for wildlife management across the country. Chronic wasting disease had become a crisis in many regions, with traditional culling methods proving costly and often ineffective. Aurora's pack demonstrated a natural, sustainable approach to disease control that could potentially save thousands of elk and deer. Nathan watched as the pack moved methodically across the landscape, their hunting formation now familiar to the observation team. Aurora took the lead position with her white-tailed son flanking to the right and a younger female to the left. The remaining wolves spread out in a strategic pattern that allowed them to test multiple elk simultaneously, identifying those with subtle movement abnormalities indicative of early-stage infection. The University of Wyoming team is arriving tomorrow, Rebecca reminded them. They're bringing the new acoustic monitoring equipment. Nathan nodded. The Aurora project had quickly gained attention in wildlife research circles, attracting collaborations with universities and conservation organizations eager to study the pack's unusual behavior. What had begun as Nathan's solitary act of compassion had evolved into a groundbreaking research initiative with implications for predator-prey dynamics, disease management, and wildlife conservation policy. "How's the documentary request coming along?" he asked Thomas, who had been fielding increasing media interest in the project. "Still negotiating terms," Thomas replied. "I'm insisting on final approval over any footage that could reveal precise locations or disrupt the pack's patterns, and significant portions of any proceeds would go directly to conservation efforts." Nathan appreciated his son's protective stance. Public interest in Aurora's pack was a double-edged sword, raising awareness about wolf conservation while potentially introducing harmful human interference. The balance required constant vigilance. As the afternoon light began to fade, Nathan remained on the observation deck while Rebecca and Thomas went inside to prepare dinner. These solitary moments at dusk had become a cherished ritual, a time for reflection and connection with the landscape he had devoted his life to understanding. The pack had moved deeper into the valley, becoming shadowy forms in the gathering darkness. Through his night vision binoculars, Nathan could still make out Aurora, who had paused on a small rise, her attention seemingly focused on the research station. "I see you too," Nathan murmured, though she was far beyond hearing range. Yet somehow, as had happened many times over the past months, Aurora seemed to sense his presence. She remained still for several long moments, facing directly toward the observation deck, before rejoining her pack. Nathan no longer questioned these moments of apparent connection. Whether explained by Aurora's unusual lineage, her extraordinary sensory capabilities, or something more ineffable, the bond between them transcended simple scientific explanation. In saving her, he had set in motion events that ultimately saved him, both literally during the blizzard and in the deeper sense of renewed purpose and family reconciliation. The research station door opened, spilling warm light onto the deck. "Dad, dinner's ready," Thomas called. Inside, the main room of the station hummed with activity. Rebecca was analyzing the day's footage with two research assistants, while the communications specialist was uploading data to the project's secure server. The space embodied the perfect balance Nathan had sought. Advanced technology enabling research while maintaining respectful distance from the subjects being studied. Over dinner, conversation flowed easily between scientific observations and personal matters. The Aurora Project had created a community of purpose, drawing together people united by their commitment to understanding and protecting these remarkable wolves. "I had a call from Eleanor today," Thomas mentioned as they cleared the dishes. "Blackwood's attorney is petitioning for modification of his house arrest terms." Nathan frowned. "On what grounds?" "Medical necessity. He's claiming his health is deteriorating due to confinement." Thomas shook his head skeptically. Eleanor thinks it's more likely he's testing boundaries, seeing what he can get away with. He's still dangerous, Rebecca said quietly. Even under house arrest, he has connections and resources. The judge assigned to review the petition is familiar with his history, Thomas assured them, and the sealed documents about the research facility remain powerful leverage. He knows crossing certain lines would bring unwanted scrutiny. The mention of the research facility still triggered mixed emotions for Nathan. The revelation that Aurora was descended from subjects in a behavioral study had initially felt like a diminishment of the connection he'd felt with her, as if their bond were somehow less authentic because of her unusual origins. With time, however, he had come to a different understanding. Aurora's lineage didn't diminish her wildness or the significance of their connection. It simply added another layer to her remarkable story. She was a creature of multiple worlds, carrying the cognitive adaptations from her research subject ancestors while embodying the freedom and natural instincts of a wild wolf. Later that evening, as the research team reviewed the day's observations in the main room, Nathan slipped outside again. The night was clear, stars scattered across the dark sky like frost crystals, the waxing moon casting silver light across the valley. From the ridge below came the sound he had been waiting for, a wolf's howl, deep and resonant, joined seconds later by another, then another, until the entire pack's voices blended in a wild chorus that echoed across the landscape. Thomas joined him quietly, standing shoulder to shoulder as they listened to the wolves calling into the night. "I never get tired of that sound," Thomas said softly. "Nor do I," Nathan agreed. "And I've been listening to it for 30 years. They stood in companionable silence until the howling gradually faded, the pack moving on to their night hunting grounds. "I've been thinking," Thomas said eventually, "about expanding the Aurora Project's scope, using our findings to challenge some of the predator control policies in neighboring states." Nathan glanced at his son, noting the determined set of his jaw, Catherine's determination in a face that otherwise mirrored his own. "It would be controversial," Nathan cautioned. "Ranching interests in those states have considerable political influence." "So did Blackwood," Thomas pointed out. "But when presented with compelling evidence and public support, even entrenched interests can be moved. What Aurora's pack has demonstrated about selective predation could change the entire conversation about predator management." Nathan nodded slowly. "It would require solid legal strategy alongside the scientific data." "That's why we make a good team," Thomas smiled. "Your science, my legal expertise." The simple statement, "we make a good team," warmed Nathan more than he could express. After years of estrangement, after all the missed opportunities and misunderstandings, they had found their way to this moment of shared purpose and mutual respect. The next morning brought news that altered their plans. Rebecca burst into the research station's kitchen where Nathan was preparing breakfast, her expression a mixture of excitement and concern. "Aurora's pack is on the move," she announced. "Not just normal hunting patterns, they appear to be relocating entirely." Nathan followed her to the monitoring room where satellite tracking data showed the pack traveling steadily northwest, away from their established territory. "When did this start?" he asked, studying the movement pattern. "First unusual movements detected around midnight. By dawn, they were 5 miles outside their normal range and still moving." Rebecca pointed to the screen. "They've maintained this direction consistently for over 6 hours. That's deliberate migration, not hunting," Nathan confirmed. "But what would trigger this? There's abundant prey in their current territory, no unusual human activity, no evidence of other predators moving in." The question occupied the research team throughout the day as they tracked the pack's continuing journey. By evening, Aurora had led her wolves nearly 15 miles from their established hunting grounds into a region of the park with rougher terrain, and less optimal conditions for the selective predation strategy they had perfected. "It doesn't make sense," Thomas said, reviewing the satellite imagery of the new location. "They're leaving prime territory with abundant diseased elk for an area with smaller, healthier herds and more challenging hunting conditions." Nathan studied the maps, a thought forming. "What else is in that region? Any unusual geographic features?" Rebecca overlaid additional data points. "There's a thermal area about 3 miles from their current position. Several hot springs, some minor geothermal activity." "And beyond that?" She zoomed out further. "More mountainous terrain, then it drops into a valley system that eventually connects to—" She stopped suddenly. "That's it. The valley system connects to the region where the original research facility was located." The realization silenced the room. Aurora was leading her pack toward the area where her ancestors had been part of the behavioral research program, an area none of them had visited in their lifetimes. "It could be coincidence," Thomas suggested, though his tone conveyed doubt. "Wolves don't migrate without reason," Nathan replied, "especially not when leaving prime hunting territory." "But how could she know?" Rebecca asked the question they were all considering. "Even if we accept that Aurora descended from the research subjects, how could she possibly have knowledge of a location her ancestors left decades ago?" Nathan had no scientific answer, yet he couldn't dismiss the pattern emerging. "We need to follow them, not to interfere, but to document whatever happens next." The expedition was organized with careful efficiency, minimal personnel, non-intrusive observation methods, emergency protocols in place given the remote location. Nathan insisted on joining despite concerns about his health, compromising by agreeing to remain at base camp rather than tracking directly through difficult terrain. They established their observation point on a ridge overlooking the valley where Aurora's pack had temporarily settled. For 2 days, the wolves exhibited unusual behavior, methodical exploration of the area rather than hunting, with Aurora repeatedly investigating specific locations as if searching for something. On the 3rd morning, Nathan woke before dawn, drawn outside by some indefinable instinct. The air was crisp with early spring chill, the eastern sky just beginning to lighten. Through night vision binoculars, he scanned the valley below, finding Aurora's pack gathered near a series of low, crumbling concrete foundations, the only remaining physical evidence of the research facility that had been dismantled decades earlier. As Nathan watched, Aurora moved purposefully among the ruins, investigating each structure before stopping at what appeared to have been the main building. She raised her head, sampling the air, then let out a long, mournful howl that cut through the pre-dawn stillness. One by one, the other wolves joined her, their voices blending in a chorus that seemed to Nathan both a lamentation and an affirmation, an acknowledgement of their unusual origins and a celebration of their wild freedom. Thomas emerged from his tent, drawn by the howling. "What's happening?" he whispered, accepting the binoculars Nathan handed him. "Something important," Nathan replied simply. "Something we may never fully understand." The pack remained at the site of the former facility for 3 more days before beginning their journey back to their established territory. The research team followed at a respectful distance, documenting but not interfering, collecting data while acknowledging the limitations of scientific explanation for what they had witnessed. Upon returning to the Aurora Project Station, Nathan spent long hours reviewing the footage, making notes, and consulting with colleagues who specialized in wolf cognition and behavior. No definitive explanation emerged for Aurora's pilgrimage to her ancestral origins, but the event deepened the research team's appreciation for the complexity of wolf consciousness and social memory. As spring advanced toward summer, the Aurora Project continued to yield important discoveries. The pack's selective predation technique was documented in scientific journals, attracting attention from wildlife management agencies facing chronic wasting disease outbreaks. Thomas's legal advocacy resulted in policy revisions that incorporated natural predation into disease management strategies in 3 states. Nathan's role evolved as well. Though still serving as research advisor, he began writing a book about Aurora and her pack, weaving together scientific observation with personal reflection on the interconnectedness of all living beings. The process of writing reconnected him with Catherine's memory in unexpected ways. He often found himself incorporating her perspectives on nature and relationships, creating a narrative that honored both scientific rigor and emotional truth. One evening in early June, as golden light bathed the observation deck, Nathan sat with his laptop open to the nearly completed manuscript. Thomas joined him, carrying 2 glasses of scotch. "To Aurora," Thomas said, raising his glass in a toast. "To Aurora," Nathan echoed, taking a small sip of the amber liquid. Below them, the valley was lush with late spring growth, wildflowers painting the meadows in splashes of color. Through binoculars, they could see Aurora's pack resting in the lengthening shadows, several young cubs tumbling playfully around the adults, the next generation of this remarkable lineage. "I finished reading the manuscript," Thomas said. "It's powerful, Dad. The way you've balanced the science with the personal journey, it tells a story that will reach beyond academic circles." "That was my hope," Nathan acknowledged, "that Aurora's story might help people see wolves differently, not just as symbols or predators, but as complex beings adapting to a changing world. Just like us," Thomas added quietly. Nathan nodded, feeling the truth of that simple observation. In the year since he had found Aurora, trapped and bleeding, everything had changed. His understanding of wolves, his relationship with his son, his perspective on his own life's work. What had begun as a solitary act of compassion had rippled outward, creating connections and revelations he could never have anticipated. From the valley came the sound of Aurora's howl, distinctive and familiar now to everyone at the research station. She stood at the edge of the meadow, her silver coat catching the last light of day, her voice rising clear and strong into the evening air. Nathan and Thomas remained on the deck until darkness fell completely, listening as the pack's howls faded into the night. No scientific instruments could measure what passed between man and wolf across that distance, but Nathan felt it nonetheless. A recognition spanning species and circumstance, a connection forged through compassion and preserved through understanding. He had risked everything to save Aurora, setting in motion a chain of events no one could have predicted. The consequences had transformed scientific understanding, environmental policy, family relationships, and his own heart. Some might call it destiny or coincidence, but Nathan preferred to see it simply as the natural outcome of one crucial choice, the choice to act with compassion when confronted with suffering, regardless of the rules or risks. As he and Thomas finally turned to go inside, Nathan paused for one last look at the darkened valley where Aurora led her extraordinary pack. The moon cast silver light across the landscape they both called home, illuminating the shared territory of wild and human worlds, separate but eternally connected. When life places us at crossroads where rules conflict with compassion, Nathan Reed's story reminds us that sometimes the greatest risks yield the most meaningful rewards. After dedicating his life to science, this widowed wildlife biologist broke every protocol to save a wounded wolf, never imagining this single act would heal the painful estrangement from his son, give him purpose after loss, and ultimately save his own life. Like Nathan, many of us in our golden years face moments where we must choose between safe familiarity and uncertain connection. His journey teaches us that it's never too late to mend broken family bonds, find renewed purpose, or open our hearts to unexpected connections. The most profound healing often comes through acts of compassion toward others, whether human or wild. Perhaps in your own life there's a relationship needing repair or a passion waiting to be rekindled. What risk might be worth taking? What unexpected joy might be waiting just beyond your comfort zone? I'd love to hear your stories of second chances or moments when breaking the rules led to unexpected blessings. Have you ever taken a risk that changed your life's direction? Please share your experiences in the comments below.